I'm going to start. Good afternoon, everyone. Looks like the mayor and Councillor Hanmer are right on time. Perfect. So I'm just going to apologize in advance. I'm day 6 on an asthma attack, so I don't sound all that great, so I apologize. And I have a really rough cough, but I can promise you I'm not sharing it. It's just asthma. So I just wanted to start with a territorial acknowledgement. We'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather, land on which we're broadcasting from today, is the land traditionally cared for by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and neutral people. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today. And just going to take a moment for reflection. At the beginning of this council meeting, we paused to think about the needs of our community. May we show wisdom and compassion in all of our decisions. Disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof, council. Seeing none. We have delegations, and the folks from the Community Justice Center are here, so thank you for coming today and welcome. Chris Cowie and Jason Spencer. And we'll turn it over to you. You have 10 minutes or...
Okay, Mayor and City Council, thank you for having us today. I'm Chris Cowie. I'm the Executive Director at Community Justice Initiatives. There are two rather significant social innovations that really sprung out of this region that oftentimes we're not as proud of as we should be. One of those is restorative justice. So we at Community Justice Initiatives have been practicing restorative justice for almost 50 years now, a different way to imagine justice, where we bring people together, we reconcile differences, we repair relationships, and we focus in on people being able to repair harm as opposed to simply singling out a wrongdoer and punishing them. And we've innovated multiple ways in which we can do that. Another great innovation in this area is looking at crime prevention through the lens of social development, community development, and upstream interventions, recognizing that there are a lot of ills that we experience in our community and a lot of conflict that had we put the right things in place and had we maybe adjusted policy in the right direction, that we could actually prevent those things from happening. The Justice Center is bringing those two things together under one roof, and so CJI has been tasked with being able to do this, where we continue to innovate more restorative responses to conflict in our community, at the same time as being able to spot and identify and promote upstream interventions. Jason Spencer is the director of the Justice Center, and I'll let him talk a little bit more about some of the work that we're doing there.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Good afternoon, Mayor, council members. Thanks so much for having us visit with you this afternoon. I've been working at Community Justice Initiatives for about 10 years. Prior to my current role, I coordinated our community mediation services, and throughout my history at CJI, we've had an ongoing working relationship with the city, primarily around working with neighbors in conflict referred from Waterloo bylaw. However, over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, we've been really deepening our relationship with the city in a number of different ways, including helping with workplace mediations, supporting citizens of Waterloo to resolve conflicts through our free mediation services. And more recently, we've been working on policy development with your, hope I get this right, reconciliation, equity, accessibility, diversity and inclusion team, thanks for that, the READY team, and looking at how to change some of the upstream work that gets done at the city to incorporate more restorative language or more restorative responses in that. As well, we also helped the Neighborhood Summit to put together a guide to addressing hate-motivated incidents. So we've already started to do upstream work with the city of Waterloo. What we're looking at doing is continuing that work and looking how to deepen that relationship with you. And so in my role, what I'm doing is looking at how we might be able to do that. And really an important component of that is to build relationship. And so this is an example of relationship building, coming out and sharing information And it would be great to be able to talk more intimately about what's going on, what your needs are. We're not coming in saying we necessarily know the solutions. We do have tools in our toolkit that can hopefully help to build and expand upon the ways that the city works, and to look at how do we mitigate conflict and harm further upstream so that it's not just left in the hands of the individuals who are experiencing that. And I will say, in terms of some of my engagement with the city, I've seen, and this isn't just with this city, but just in systems in general, how systems contribute to the harm and conflict that are being experienced by people in our community. And if we can look at changing or building in more restorative responses upstream, then that can maybe help to diffuse some of those conflicts so that, not that they're not going to happen, but perhaps that they happen in a different way or in a more timely way so that people aren't becoming entrenched in their situations and the harm and conflict being deepened in our communities. What else do I want to say? I think just really looking at that relationship building piece is important. So we have some good connections with members of your city, and looking to deepen those. And I would also just think about where might this start here at this council level in terms of looking at how restorative responses might be applied within the work that you do as leaders within our community in order to encourage and support what is happening downstream. Now, community justice initiatives work downstream continues to happen. We provide mediation services, and we also want to look at how do we develop more inclusive, equitable partnerships upstream to reduce conflict and harm in our community. Chris, anything you want to add?
Well, that's great. If you don't have anything else to add, I can see if there's any questions from my colleagues. I really appreciate you coming in, and I know that you are doing a lot of work with our bylaw team, and I think that's been really successful because a lot of times individuals don't know how to enter into a conversation with one another once they've already said things that they wish that they hadn't or wish they'd maybe said differently. So I certainly appreciate that. You had a question, Councillor Hanmer?
Yes, thank you through you, Chair Freeman. Thank you for your presentation. I always enjoy being reminded that you're in our community and available to us. So to that point, just what kinds of things are you doing, or how can we help make it more top of mind? There's lots of times that we're seeing interactions between probably neighbor to neighbor more than anything else, but just having in our back pocket your phone numbers on speed dial, your email addresses, your text. What kind of promotion, or could we be doing something about that can help continue to get the word out?
Well, in relationship to the Community Justice Center, it'd be great to have coffee with you and talk a little bit about that. Our direct downstream services are available, right? And so we're just a phone call or email away. But really what we're here to talk about today is really looking at the systems that we are all entrenched in, that we're all impacted in, and looking at how do we make change in those. So really that focus on how we do the work, because what you're seeing in terms of those neighbor conflicts is a reflection of the challenges that we're all seeing and experiencing in our community, where polarization, lack of conversation, not understanding ways of being in relationship with one another are impacting how neighbors are showing up with each other, right? And in that, what's happening is then the conflict is put between those two neighbors when in fact it may actually be impacted by things that are happening upstream. And I'll just use this as an example. It's not to look sourly at the service provider, but police come into a situation regarding neighbors, and sometimes what they will suggest is that, oh, we need evidence to support why we need to actually do something against your neighbor, right? Can you prove that there's a neighbor dispute? And so they'll suggest things like surveillance cameras. And from a police perspective, totally get that, right? They need evidence, they need things to be documented, they need to see the timeline and histories. From a relational aspect,
Not the right thing.
not helpful. Because what it does is, well, I hear from neighbors, oh, my neighbor just installed 20 cameras. I'm exaggerating a bit, but that sense of all of a sudden it's like this very heavily surveilled relationship because of the surveillance, whereas if we looked at how maybe police come into that conversation, what could they do differently in that situation, then maybe then they wouldn't be putting the onus on the surveillance on the parties, but putting the onus of relationship on the parties. Because the challenge is that we invite power into relationships because we feel like we don't have any power, when that may or may not be the case, depending on our situations. But what it does, if we go there directly, is that it does de-emphasize or disempower us from actually having power in the relationship. Because now I've invited someone in uniform who I think is going to come in and make a decision on my behalf, who is unable to make a decision on my behalf because there's not actually a crime being committed.
Right.
And so in that stream of decisions that have been made along the way, two neighbors are still in the place of having conflict with one another and nothing's been resolved. Mm-hmm. And in fact, they also feel harmed because they feel like nothing's been resolved when they thought I was calling in the people who I thought were going to resolve things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, similarly, I just want to add, anytime that you can do something earlier on, you have a much better chance of actually accomplishing something. So a first response, being a restorative response, has a great opportunity to be able to solve a problem before it becomes a much bigger problem. So when bylaw officers have shown up several times, people have been fined, police show up, and then we get called, it's like a last resort. Can you salvage the relationship when these things have actually contributed to really damaging those relationships? So if there's one thing that could be really promoted, it's moving this to be a first response.
Thanks, Chris, for that. Hence, that was really more my question. How can it be top of mind that it is number one rather than number 7 in the whole step of things? So I appreciate that.
It's also not necessarily waiting until something blows. So, you know, we know that we want to have highly diverse communities. We want that we understand all of the benefits of that. But when all of a sudden a community changes a great deal in a hurry, then we should be doing things in a proactive way in order to promote good relationship development there. We've done these things in the past, but usually people stand back and go, yeah, something's going to give, something's going to go. And then when it does, that's when you start taking action. So we really need to move some of these kinds of initiatives upstream that way.
Great. Thank you very much.
Other questions? Councillor Wright? Thanks, through you, Chair. Thank you so much for this presentation. I'm just curious how your work has been impacted by the pressures on our mental health support systems, and whether you're feeling that, you know, in terms of the expansion of your work, or that you're coming in at a different point. And secondly, just the role that misinformation is maybe playing in your landscape too.
That's a very big question. So, you know, to say that there's any area that mental health problems are not impacting would be difficult to say. So obviously we're dealing with conflict, and we're dealing with crime, we're dealing with, you know, interpersonal types of difficulties and whatever, and all of those things are exacerbated by any mental health problems that exist. So as we move through the pandemic and there's a decline in people's general mental health, we start to see the impact of increased conflict and those types of things. So how is our work impacted? We see more of it, and yes, there can be a certain elevated level of complexity to those situations. One of the things, though, and we can't really get into too much of it right now, a lot of people feel that any mental health problem precludes something from having a restorative response that would be meaningful. And that's actually not the case at all. In fact, if somebody has committed some sort of an offense, causes problems with a mental health problem, punishing that person and stigmatizing them only invites them to be a little bit more angry and possibly do those things again. Whereas a restorative response gets to some of what's going on inside of a person and allows them to come to a place of seeing that and accept responsibility in some sort of meaningful way. So the presence of mental health problems does not preclude somebody from having a very positive experience in a restorative response.
Thanks for that. And then just the second part of the question was just about the role that misinformation is playing. I don't know whether that's something you can answer, but
There's misinformation in so many different areas. I mean, we can pull apart just about any area of conflict and difficulties that we have, and it does play a role in exacerbating those problems. just the simple fact that we live in a very retributive way of looking at life. And this assumption that when we punish in response, and if we see something that's truly even worse than normal, if it's really bad, then we punish really heavily, the idea that that somehow is going to help the problem is the biggest piece of misinformation that has been out there for a very long period of time, and we know better. It doesn't do that. Jason talked a little bit about, the identity-based harm that we deal with in the community. There's an increasing amount of that identity-based harm, often called hate crime. If someone does something, let's say we have a 17-year-old that spray paints a swastika on the side of a synagogue. We punish that person, and we do it in a way that stigmatizes them in front of their own peer set and their own family, okay? What's the likely response? They're going to go, oh my goodness, I guess that was really bad. I really probably harmed somebody. No, the likely response is probably that we're going to reinforce whatever kind of stereotype is already growing in the heart of a 17-year-old. But if we bring that person together with people who are really impacted by those things, to tell their stories of what that symbolism actually means to them and how it's impacting them, you begin to break them down a little bit that way. And they start to understand that their actions have had real meaningful consequences in someone's heart. And that's what we're actually changing, is someone's heart that way. So when they have that opportunity, they're given the opportunity to recognize the impact of what they've done and accept responsibility in some sort of meaningful way. The biggest piece of misinformation in our society is this idea that punishment is the only thing that works.
Councillor Vasek.
Thanks, through you, Chair Freeman. I mean, great, that's like music to my ears. It's true, we go right away to punishment. That's not my question. But thanks for saying that. My question is, I'm hearing that we're moving away from restorative justice towards transformative justice, and I'm not clear on the distinction between the two, so I'm wondering if you can educate us about that.
It's a bit of a tricky one, but restorative justice, pure and simple, is being able to bring people together, recognizing the harm that has been caused, and trying to facilitate some sort of response that reconciles the relationship. Transformative justice recognizes that there are certain systemic and societal drivers to a lot of the conflict that's happening. So when we're talking about the certain minorities that may commit crimes, or it seems as though they're committing a larger number of offenses, when we look a little bit deeper, we realize that they're coming from a life that is filled with many more obstacles and difficulties that are causing that trouble. Transformative justice says we need to take it completely out of some of our white systems in order to be able to respond to that. So we need to take it completely out of the system that's designed, in this case, for achieving justice. So transformative justice really is two different things. One, it's actually impacting the systems that continue to cause harm and the structures that continue to cause that harm. And it's also putting the systems of justice right into the actual community that's being impacted. So in this country, I'm sure most of you are familiar with GLADU, the introduction of GLADU, which was to change our criminal code way back in the 1990s, so that as a first response, when we have Indigenous people who are caught in the system, the first response is to have a GLADU report done so that that justice can be meted out in a way that's consistent with their culture and something that's going to be meaningful to them. That would be something that, once it's transferred over into that, then that becomes what we would call transformative justice. We have various communities within our community where there's a great deal of conflict and harm that comes out, and so it's up to us to ignite those grassroots movements where they can come up with their own ways of being able to mete out that justice, and that would qualify as transformative justice. Just to tie the bow on the whole GLADU thing, though, because it's a bit of a something that I'm pretty aggravated about, because we've had this around for a very, very long time. I was at a restorative justice conference just about 2 years ago, and it happened to be in Saskatchewan, and I was part of a discussion that said, yeah, there's not currently one single person that's trained to do a GLADU report in this entire province. So we make these ideas, we talk about it, our Prime Minister has even talked about restorative justice, but actually, putting your money where your mouth is something that doesn't really happen in this field.
Thanks.
Mayor McKay.
Thank you, through you, Chair, and thank you for coming in, both Jason and Chris. It's always really good for us to hear more about some of the work that organizations like yourselves are doing in the community, and to really prompt for me, and I hope probably for the rest of council and some of our staff, about what things that are working and you know, ways and places and opportunities to continue to the work and to get more at that upstream proactive work. So I'd welcome the opportunity to meet with you, to talk about this in a bit more depth, a bit more, as you said, in a bit more intimate setting, so that we can really talk a bit more deeply about some opportunities maybe that we have here at the city. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. So next up is staff reports. Yep. And so the first is fleet replacement with a funding release. And Tracy Bell's here to answer any questions. Council, did you have any questions on that report? Seeing none, can I have a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Hanmer, seconded by Councillor Wright. All those in favor? That is carried unanimously. The capital budget reclassification into routine projects, I was thinking that looked like what we were expecting to see come back after budget day. Was there any questions on that? Brad's here to answer any questions if there is. Got it right, my friend. No questions. Can I have a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Bodley, seconded by Councillor Hanmer. All those in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Housing Enabling Water Systems Fund. So Dan is here to answer any questions if we have on that, or is it Francis? I can't see. It's Francis, yeah, sorry. Was there, and also Brad's here for this one too. Any questions, Councillor Wright? Yep.
Thanks through you, Chair. I just have, this is a great opportunity for us, obviously. And I'm just curious whether there are any opportunities for us to do anything innovative with this grant. I'm imagining we're on a short timeline based on the report. But specifically, I was thinking about something like waste heat recovery from the sanitary system, whether there's any sort of space for innovation. Thanks.
Through you, Chair, Councillor Wright. Great question. We've actually investigated as part of detailed design some LID initiatives, so that will be incorporated. In terms of some of the other options that you've mentioned, the right-of-way is fairly limited in terms of width, so we are very constrained on some of the elements that we can incorporate, but there will be LIDs incorporated as part of design.
Okay, thanks for that. And for anybody listening, those were low-impact developments?
That's correct.
Thanks.
Did you want to move that motion? Yeah, moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Vasek. Any other questions on this, Council? All those in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. We're on to the award of tender for Hillcrest Avenue reconstruction. Was there any questions on that tender? May I have a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Rowe, seconded by Councillor Roach. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. The Brownfields Incentive Program, so this is a TIG program. Staff informed me it's one of the first times we've done a phase TIG, so this is kind of an interesting one, and the region's done phase TIGs before too, so I'm kind of excited about this one. So moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Rowe. All those in favor? That is carried unanimously. And we're on to the award of tender for Quickfall Drive in Langford Place, Mayfield Avenue. Moved by Councillor Vasek. You had a question? Yeah, great. Please proceed.
I'll move it too, but yeah, thanks through you, Chair Freeman. Just a couple of questions. So this is the road. Well, Quickfall is the road to get to Lincoln Heights, and so over the years there have been parents who walk their kids and enroll their kids to school asking for the street to be safer. So I'm curious if the increased safety measures for walking and enrolling to school have been considered in this project and what they are. So what can families expect?
Through you, Chair, Councillor Vasic. So great question, Councillor. So there's elements in the design that we've added to help facilitate better movement for pedestrians. So for example, the sidewalks are going to be wider, so they're going to be increased from 1.5 to 1.8 meters. Also, the island at the end in front of the school, we've reduced the size to allow for potentially more parking and more space for buses, for drop-offs. Also, as part of construction, because vehicles aren't going to be able to go through the street to get to the school, students will need to be dropped off in the church parking lot. So that's going to be during construction. That's something that we can explore as well too with our colleagues in transportation and also MES. If there's any way that we can improve that interaction between pedestrian drop-offs and vehicular movement in and out of that street.
Okay, that's great. The church is already used, but yeah, if you're looking at some additional ideas that come out of the construction, that would be great. Can you just explain why having a smaller island and more room for buses will make it safer?
Through you, Chair, Councillor Vasic. So creating a smaller island effectively creates a wider width for vehicular travel. As you're aware, with buses being, with the size of buses, it's very difficult to maneuver with the existing configuration. So the smaller island is going to give you that additional turning radius for buses, which would hopefully allow them to fit more buses, park in that area, and to be able to drop off students more efficiently.
Yeah, I guess it's better than them like buses driving on the sidewalk where kids are walking. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so if following the reconstruction, so hopefully this fixes some of the challenges and then more will come because of observations that are made, but if challenges persist after, what are the best mechanisms for residents or parents bringing their kids to school or the school to look at additional measures for safety?
Through you, Chair, the Councillor Vasic, we'll continue to keep an eye on that street even after construction to see if there's any other potential tweaks or improvements that can be made in collaboration with municipal enforcement and transportation staff, as well as the school board.
Okay, great. Thanks, Francis.
Excellent. Would you like to move that motion? Yeah. Moved by Councillor Vasic, seconded by Councillor Rowe. Did I already say that? I don't think so. Okay. All right. All those in favor? So that is carried unanimously. Thank you. So we are on to consideration of notice given at a previous meeting, and there's none. Is there any notices of motion, Council? Seeing none. Communications and correspondence, there's none. Unfinished business, none. Is there any questions, Council? No? New business? Councillor Hanmer.
Thank you. Through you, just really a shout out, and I know that we're going to get more information as the weeks and days come through, but a shout out to Nicole Papke and the rest of our team that was responsible for all the preparations for St. Patrick's Day and really focusing on making it safe and safe not only for the students but the residents around in the area and the staff. So thank you, and your updates were well appreciated too.
Thank you. Any other new business? Seeing none, enactment of bylaws. I need a mover, please. Moved by Councillor Wright, seconded by Councillor Rowe. All those in favor? That is carried unanimously, and we are adjourned at 2:30. Moved by Councillor Hanmer, seconded by Councillor Wright. All those in favor? We are adjourned.